Jujutsu Kaisen is an incredible accumulation of beautiful animated works from the past several years. Through the artwork alone, Jujutsu Kaisen has far surpassed my expectations and has delivered monumental fight scenes back to back to back. There are so many fight scenes in this arc, one could only believe that they would save the majority of their budget for the most impactful fights. However, every fight scene in this arc has been given an ungodly amount of care. I no longer believe this season is simply a feat of stunning animation, but a work of art given thanks to past animations that make this piece possible. I want you to think to yourself, how many fights have happened in the last 25 episodes? Off the top of my head, I could name at least 10 of them. What baffles me the most when coming to this realization is how many times the animation quality noticeably dropped. This doesn't mean a substantial drop, but rather a drop that can easily be attributed to either a low budget or a low amount of available man hours. To give you an example, look at any of the Black Clover fights that aren't main antagonists. They sit on frames for long periods of time, they show little actual movement, and the character models are sloppily scribbled down due to deadlines creeping forward. Jujutsu Kaisen is by no means perfect. I can tell from the last few episodes signs of the budget creeping forward, but even still the detail added to key shots far exceeds the status quo. I don't understand what unholy pact they made with the devil, but no matter how many fights they have to animate, they still add so much to each scene. How about this? Instead of talking about every fight scene as a whole, we focus on one for the time being and show just what an incredible job they were able to do with the source material. You might be thinking I'm going to jump straight for the Chozo versus Itadori fight, but I think one fight that doesn't get enough credit is the next one Itadori finds himself in. Itadori versus Mahito. And for this example, I am only referring to the first half. Everything after the be the second half. The fight against Mahito is a standout in my eyes due to the way the two fighters use the environment around them. Another factor that makes this so dynamic is the power level of both combatants. They aren't god-level beings like Gojo or Sukuna. They are weaker, meaning that each blow, which Sukuna or Gojo could easily take, is a lot more impactful to each other. You won't be seeing Mahito blowing up a quarter of Shibuya because he used his domain expansion. So smaller feats, like hitting each other with Black Flash, feels a lot stronger in the context of the show than it actually is, meaning it all falls down to the context. If somebody gets thrown through a building 40 times and stands up without a scratch, then every future time they get thrown through a building, it feels meaningless. You might be wondering why I brought up the smaller scale as being such an important factor in this fight. That's because of the way that they use the environment. If you put two of the strongest fighters in the same environment, then it wouldn't play out nearly the same. But because they are weak characters, the fighters can use their surroundings in vastly different ways. Not only do they use their surroundings differently, but they are also affected by it differently as well. Let's look at the manga for a brief moment. The fight in the manga ignore their surroundings, relying on how the two primarily fight rather than how they would fight in a subway station. The anime, on the other hand, raises this fight to an 11. Instead of having the possibility of fights overlapping in style, making each one feel so similar to the other that they are interchangeable, Mappa made this one incredibly distinct. Here are just a few examples that stood out to me. We have Itadori and Mahito fighting in a cramped space as a wall slowly crushes the two of them, and we have them fighting close quarters once again in the elevator. The fight between Chozo and Itadori focused on two factors. The first being how Chozo used his abilities, and the second is how the two adapted to each other's tactics. On the flip side, because we already know how Mahito fights, we see more of how the two counter each other. Mahito is able to shift into any shape he wants, so this fight focuses more on how Itadori adapts to changing circumstances. Mappa was able to change a generic fight scene into one focused on a specific theme. It's incredible to see what starving your animators of free time can do to your work. But that's not the last thing I want to praise Mappa for. There's a 100% chance you noticed Mappa adding callbacks to famous works. For example, the Mechamaru fight had a callback to Evangelion and Gurren Lagann. And the Itadori plus Todo vs Mahito has a My Hero callback. They also have some random callback to what looks like a possible magical girl, boxer, anime thingy-majig, but I haven't seen enough to be sure. I'm getting a little off track, so let's continue. Adding these scenes into the show doesn't necessarily add anything to the anime, but what it does do is add a tasteful nod to all the previous works that came before it. It's not adding a scene and just going, "Mimba dat?" It's either throwing the callbacks in as jokes for the people who know what it's from, or using it not only because of its association from a previous work, but also because it fits the fight scene just perfectly. Even if you don't know what some of these callbacks are, they're still funny because of how out of the box they are, and they are still badass when they need to be. Though I worry how some of these will age with time, I believe they blend references with action borderline perfectly. I do find a few faults with the show, that of which originates from the original work and not from the animation style. The problems in their entirety stem from the poor level of storytelling presented by the author. One of the most important faults involved the amount of time they spent on each death during this arc. There were some deaths in the manga that were so brief it left a sting. It's not only disrespectful to the characters to throw them away like that, but also disrespectful to the people who love those characters. You could tell the moment that they started killing people off rapidly that the author didn't care anymore. They simply had a place they wanted the story to get to regardless of what would be the best way of getting there. This is what made me hate the manga, and that's not even including some of the other terrible storytelling issues. Once the new arc began, the story felt entirely disjointed and incomprehensible. You can't kill off 90% of the characters that made your manga incredible and pretend like nothing happened. In comes Mappa, ready to fix the story. As a slight tangent, I've read all of Attack on Titan, but I haven't seen the final season of the anime. And by the final season, I mean any of the final seasons. I've read Mappa fix some of the issues people had with the manga by adding additional context, so it comes to no surprise that they did the same thing with this manga. Let's talk about the Jogo scene. Hope that's how you pronounce it. I dislike this scene because they took two iconic characters and pressed the delete key on them. I'm all fine with letting them die off in order to show just how powerful Jogo has become, but Nanami's death was so disrespectful. Even after they showed him still alive, he only stayed alive for about 5 more panels and then he died again. It didn't feel like they gave him the send-off he deserved, but rather just used him as a tool to further Itadori's character. In the anime, however, they extended the scene. They gave him an imaginary, carefree life, just a beautiful day on the beach as he shreds through numerous curses, which makes up his job. This is what Mappa seems to excel at, not just adding incredible animation, but also adding more room for scenes to breathe. Without this scene, we see just how little the author cared. It felt as though this entire arc existed simply to make the culling game exist. He had to rush through the arc to show a bunch of characters dying in order to shake up the status quo, but in the most rushed way possible. Instead of just slowing down and building onto the characters so that they can have one last send-off before dying, the author just said, haha, rip bozo, next! Now let's move over to some inexcusable nonsense that shouldn't exist in the first place. For example, Mekamaru being able to do some BS and resurrect himself as a walkie-talkie is just so stupid to me. It just seems like the writer needed a way to spread information to the other characters, so they wrote some BS into the script to accomplish that. This is one of those things that almost impossible to fix with a manga without changing a lot of it, so they just kept it the same in the anime. Luckily, it's used sparingly. Another thing I wish that they spent more time on was Chozo not killing Itadori. They explain why at the end of the arc, but that's so many pages in the future that the story just feels weird and disjointed. For example, when me or any of the friends saw the, "Oh, I can't kill him," it made us all go, "Huh?" And it wasn't even our fault. The narrator even says, "A memory was born inside of Chozo's brain of a past event that never happened." This only opens up more questions. The author could have easily done this scene a million times better if they simply wrote it with Chozo feeling another one of his brothers on the brink of death, but they instead went with this nonsensical moment. It only further confuses the audience and makes it seem like somebody used their ability to save Itadori rather than Chozo feeling his brother on the brink of death. Another thing which helps corroborate this idea is that 2 sorcerers, of which we don't know their full powers, appear seconds later. It's not unreasonable to assume one of them activated their ability on Chozo in order to save Sukuna. And yet another thing, why did they decide adding a flashback for Nobara in the middle of a fight was a good idea? It felt janky and disjointed, yet again, especially how long they spent on the flashback. I don't want to see this. I want to see them fight because that's the moment that they started showing a flashback. It's pretty obvious Nobara is about to kick the bucket. In the past, I was okay with anime doing this, but them doing this now just annoys me. It's like, yeah. Wait, Is that a flashback? Not this again. God, come on. I'm not even done yet. Another problem is Gojo not killing the strongest curses in the train fight. Why would he go with the weakest curses when he should have killed the strongest? He could have saved everybody if he took out Jogo and Mahito, which he had all the opportunity to do so. You can't even say that he was trying to take the safest route in order to save the most people, because he has already let so many people die during this fight. Finally, the last bad storytelling point I like to bring up is the very end of the anime. They made all the jujutsu sorcerers fucking idiots. They deemed Gojo as an accomplice, even though he was literally captured by the enemy to prevent him killing all of them. There is no reasonable conclusion that deems Gojo as an accomplice, especially since they know the enemy captured him. They sentenced the principal and Itadori to death, which, if you compile everything that has happened this season, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, okay, I'm okay with Itadori dead. You know, Itadori should die because of what he caused, all right? But killing Yaga is just so incomprehensibly stupid. They already lost several jutsu sorcerers during the Shibuya incident, so let's just, kill 2 more, I guess, and also prevent their strongest member from being rezzed, all right? This is one of the worst moments in all of the jujutsu history, so why would they want even fewer members to prevent the end of the world? It's a 4 IQ move, 1 IQ per elder. I'm okay with them wanting Itadori and Yaga dead, okay? Only if they are capable of explaining the reason behind their decision. Even if I were to say that the reason they don't want Gojo freed is because they fear his power, at least explain that to the audience, okay? Not just, let's label him as a traitor after the audience make up some random reason why they don't want him freed. They should have made more of an outline of that in the future so that they could be like, okay, so there was already brewing tension between these things. No, it was like 2 mentions of it happening, and then 90 chapters later in the manga, they're like, oh, we don't want him out. Why do they don't want him out? It's just a passing glance. I mean, just read the patch notes. They just said they don't want him out. That's what it feels like. The characters and the reasons behind all the stupid decisions made in this manga was solely driven by the idea that everybody and everything is a simple tool. The author doesn't try to conclude a character's arc because that's the respectful thing to do. They instead toss a character away in order to further Itadori's growth or to push the story in a specific direction. Now, that doesn't sound bad on paper, but it's so poorly done that each death feels like I'm looking up with my mouth open, waiting for the author to spit in it. It's so easy to see that everything done in this arc is so that the next arc can exist. It's not because the next arc deserves to exist because this is the obvious path that the story should take, but rather that the author wanted the story to change genres entirely, so they took a hammer and started forcing the story to bend unnatural ways in order to get it to fit into the new arc. In video game terms, imagine if the game you've always played was Stardew Valley. The next patch they released then turned Stardew Valley into a battle royale. Why, you may ask? Because the devs played Fortnite and they liked it, so they changed their game into Fortnite. It's obvious that this whole IP is being carried on the backs of incredibly talented animators. Imagining a world where the animation is also bad would make this show just so nonsensical and boring. But luckily, that's not the case. I'd like to thank you all for coming and watching my TED Talk. Like, comment, subscribe. Got a gaming channel. I play Honkai Star Rail. Please don't dislike this video because of that. You can dislike my channel. You can unsubscribe from there instead. And thank you. Have a nice day. Johnny.